Hello one and all, this is Soulful Lordy, James Bullock, once again, this time around, the Final Fantasy XVI demo review, exclusively for the PlayStation 5, for a game that is scheduled to be released on June 22nd, 2023, exclusively for the PlayStation 5. The long-awaited 16th entry of the Final Fantasy franchise is almost here, and we got a taste of this with this demo. Final Fantasy XVI revolves around the character Clive Rossfield, dominated by crystals and dominants who have, when it comes to the latter, seemingly has a connection to the Eikonics, which are essentially the summons in the game, like the Ifrits, the Shivas, the Phoenixes that we see throughout the Final Fantasy universe. We're introduced to Clive at the beginning of the game, a much older version of himself, before flashing back and seeing what he really was before the fall of his kingdom. And one of the main reasons for the fall of his kingdom was trying to protect his brother Joshua, who apparently has a very deep connection to the iconic Phoenix. One of the main reasons for Clive's kingdom to exist is to protect his brother and the dominance that exists in it. And this ties greatly into the gameplay because, as we see not necessarily during the prologue chapter, which is the first couple of hours of this demo, but the iconic challenge, which is set according to the game about 5, maybe 7 hours deep into the actual story, where you're able to utilize multiple versions of the iconic powers you have adopted. And it's through the iconic challenge that you're able to really see what the gameplay has to offer. And that's what really stood out to me, was the fact that this gameplay is a great mix of the floaty kind of whimsical Final Fantasy XV combat and the more steadfast, parry heavy, especially with one particular iconic set, Team Ninja version of Stranger of Paradise from last year. With the triangle button, you're able to shoot off magic attacks, unlimited MP, so you don't have to worry about that. Of course, the square button allows you to perform melee attacks. You have a jump button with the X button. And the circle button has a specific special ability that is tied to whatever iconic is currently being utilized. So for example, if you're utilizing the Phoenix iconic, you're able to pull off a kind of a teleport dash with the circle button. And if you're utilizing the Titan iconic, you're able to actually pull off a shield, which if you do at the proper time, you can parry an attack and actually land a counter melee strike. That became one of my favorite tools by the end of the iconic challenge, and something that I will definitely be utilizing a lot when I get the full game. Now, even though you have unlimited MP, you have the ability to utilize these special specific abilities with the Iconics unlimited times, there are some cooldown factors so you can't become this all-powerful beast. And that is the special abilities that are triggered by the R2 button. If you hold down the R2, you can utilize the melee strike to pull off a special attack or a magic attack that run on a cooldown meter, so you cannot utilize them over and over again. And a lot of the times these are best used either when, specifically with the Phoenix for example, utilizing a whirlwind attack that is able to disperse a bunch of enemies at one time, or a knockdown with the Titan version of that magic special ability. But these special attacks are really great when it comes to breaking and staggering enemies, because of course the big bosses, the main enemies that you have to face, will have a stagger meter or a will to fight meter underneath their health bar, and if you can get that down, it will stagger them and leave them wide open for a blistering amount of attacks. This also ties into the fact that you have a limit break gauge that fills up as you get damaged. So if you actually activate the limit break and then do the special attacks, fantastic damage. Now I will say that beyond a couple of the boss battles in the Iconic Challenge, specifically the ones where I had to fight 2 bosses at one time, and essentially the final boss of the Iconic Challenge section, I didn't find the game overly difficult, even with the prologue, even with the fact that I had limited options in terms of attacks and abilities. I didn't find this game to be very difficult. You have only, at this point, 2 difficulty options where you're able to play through story mode, where of course the enemies are a lot easier to defeat, or action mode, which is what I played with. And that still felt relatively easy, even with the prologue, because thanks to not only the abilities, but the ability to dodge, you have these cinematic strikes that show up during boss battles and the cinematic evade. You even get an on-screen trigger at times to evade things. if you're attacked by an adversary from off screen, or say a magic spell is coming your way and you can't see it. So the game gives you a lot of leeway to actually thrive and not get beaten down and overwhelmed. But it also made it quite easy to get through the story, get through the prologue, get through the iconic challenge. Another thing I must note that you are not playing this alone. Both times during the prologue and the iconic challenge I had backup, be it a fellow soldier or the dog Trogo, who works very similar to Red 13 from the Final Fantasy VII Remake, where he does automatic attacks and you can actually send him to do specific attacks with the touch of the D-pad. The D-pad also plays into the fact that you can utilize items mid-battle, and while you can pause the menu and set up different items for shortcuts, they are very, very handy. They work incredibly fast, very intuitive. Of course, there's upgraded abilities, there's gear, there are accessories that of course will benefit you as you progress throughout the story, that you have to figure out what works for you. From a gameplay perspective, as I said, the game was relatively simple. It's very easy. It's very easy to get into, somewhat difficult to master to a certain extent. Enemy-wise, I didn't find really that many threats, and that includes during the iconic battle itself that was kind of like an on-rail shooter that felt more automatic in nature than it did an epic battle between two gigantic monsters. Though it looked great, it didn't feel like a great battle. And hopefully that's just an early example of something that will progress and get better during different presentations during the story. My other big flaw with the gameplay was the fact that there are no indicators, at least from what I saw on screen, of elemental weaknesses. Another thing I will say was a negative in my opinion is that this game is incredibly dark. Now I know both of the major combat sections were done during the nighttime, and it isn't completely indicative of what we will see throughout the entire game, but I will say that some of the dark portions of this game are really dark and it was hard to see even with the screen setting on the brightest. I will also note that from a linearity perspective, for fans that weren't a fan of that in terms of Final Fantasy XIII or even Final Fantasy X, this actually takes a page more out of Final Fantasy X's playbook, or even Tactics or Type 0, where you have a world map that you can fast travel to, but there is no real open world to explore. Like the SNES and the PS1 versions of Final Fantasy, where you had this overworld map that you could travel across. Overall, a majority of what I played thus far I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed the story, I've enjoyed the intrigue, I've enjoyed the characters, and most importantly, I've enjoyed the combat. As I noted, there are a few flaws. The game was actually a lot easier than I kind of expected, but hopefully that changes. It'll get a little bit more of a challenge, similar to what we got with Stranger of Paradise, which I thought was a fantastic game, a very underrated game. But right now, this game has all the makings of being a fantastic experience, and quite possibly one of the greatest Final Fantasy games we've had in quite some time. So there you have it. This has been Soulful Lordy, James Bullock, once again, the Final Fantasy demo review, exclusively for the PlayStation 5, for a game that is scheduled to be released on June 22nd, 2023, exclusively for the PlayStation 5. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to go back to the Iconic Challenge. I'm going to see what mysteries I missed while I was roaming through the castle, and see if I can do a little bit better with my parry and window, so I can maybe even get a no-hit kill run. But if I can't, I will just have to make every enemy say, "Oh Lordy."